have done this a few times now, keynote
I
in
think I've
several
done this
locations.
4 times now in various lengths. But last week we did it as a week-long workshop at Beehive, and it was really, really great. So this is kind of like the take a week-long workshop and condense it into 1 hour, and here's what you get. But it's better than
Fantastic.
nothing, I think.
Yeah. Well, I want to give you all the time possible. I know people will continue to join, but let's go ahead and kick it off.
All right. So we're here today to talk about um, rethinking how we teach and assess in the AI world. Um, Definitely gotten to be a strange world over the last year. So I want to start with first of all, there is if you want the presentation, you can grab the link, which maybe I'll drop in a chat here. Whoops. Let me go back to that for a second, or you can take a picture of the QR code. I will put this back up at the end. So if you want to grab it at the end, that works too. Sometimes you got to wait to pass judgment on a presentation, right?
Do I
So
have access to your presentation that I can grab links for people?
yeah, it's in the public folder. If you just want to grab the bit.ly link here, you can paste it in the chat. Okay. First, let's just do a little quick poll. Raise your hand if you've seen homework magically done in less than a minute. Yep. Okay. How about essays or paper that sound like a graduate student wrote them? Yeah, a few of those. Okay. And presentations that are really impressive, but the student can't answer basic questions about their presentation that they just read. Okay. Seamus has got one of those. Okay. And handwritten work that is a little too perfect. Like all the steps are perfect. There's no mistakes made in the handwritten work. Okay, we've seen that too. Right. This might be a good moment to have you just drop in the chat really quick what subject you teach and what grade level, and I'll try to, as much as I can, tailor this to who we've got in the room today. Um, yeah, I think we've all been seeing a whole bunch of this stuff, and we're all trying to figure out what to do about it. I think that the long and the short of it is that we're all changing at once, and it's a little bit tricky. The students don't know what to do, the teachers don't know what to do, the administration doesn't know what to do. And so hopefully in this we'll try to get some clarity on the things that we need to be doing. So I've got middle school and high school CTE, high school biology, high school social studies, admin. All right, so let's dive in here. So I do think that AI has helped teachers with some of the workload. In fact, I think that if you need to do lesson plan compliance or assessment writing, where you make the distractors on multiple choice tests, things like that, that world has gotten way easier to do. On the other hand, evaluating student work has gotten way harder to do because we no longer know whether the student did any of the work or what extent it was. Um, so this is what I refer to as school slop. It's the submitted student work that actually takes the teacher longer to assess than it took the student to create. And that's mostly because it takes the students like 30 seconds to create the work. And then it takes the teacher, if they grade it, it takes them the time to grade, but mostly they spend the time thinking about like, what do I do about this student work that was just submitted, right? Do I turn them in? Do I kick it back to them? Um, do I have a talk with the class? Do I teach a lesson about it? But everything you pick takes you more time than it took them to do the work, right? And so that's really what I'm referring to as school slop. It's just, like when it's going to take you more time than it took them, but it's mostly a low bar because it took them no time. What this makes us is a little bit like learning detectives, and every assignment now makes us a little bit suspicious. It's hard to know who's doing what when, and we've been burned by some students already. So once we've been burned by them, we get more suspicious of their future work because of that. And we find ourselves saying things like, I don't know what students know anymore, or like grading takes forever as I try to figure out what to do with this. I don't think any of us went into the business of teaching to be grading the work of an AI. It's just not useful time spent. We've seen in-person exams that result in completely different results than homework assignments. And, as teachers, we always saw a little bit of that, where there were some some students who had, different results on homework and tests, but now it's a large percentage. We're hearing this not just in K-12, but I'm hearing it from higher ed as well, where they are just super disappointed that all the work submitted is hundreds, and then when the kids go to take a test, like the average will be like a 40% on college exams. So I don't know if this makes you feel any better, but it's not just K-12 that is having this problem. And then finally, everything from posters to presentations is starting to look AI generated. It's hard to feel like the students have any involvement in the work. So the good news is that there are a lot of solutions to this, and some of them have been running for the last couple of years, and some of them are new ones that we've come up with over the last week. We'll try in the fall, but there are solutions. This is the first little reading assignment. This is a little paper by David Wiley. I'm not going to read it to you or take the time to go over it. I'm just going to give you kind of a summary afterwards, but it's worth reading. The link is in the slides. So if you go and get the slides, you'll be able to read it from there. But basically, the premise is that before AI, we were treating student work products as evidence of learning. Because it was the easiest thing to get as an evidence of learning. It wasn't that it was the right thing. It was that it was the easiest thing. And as long as we had an easy thing, we were going to use it, right? Because we're always trying to scale in education. But after AI, the student work is not that way. We have unclear evidence about whether or not it's student work. We don't know if the student did all the thinking themselves, if they collaborated with AI back and forth, if they just prompted the AI and turned it in. We have no idea what the level of usage was. And so what this means is that student work is now failing as evidence of learning. And it's failing on a large scale. Again, we had some of these problems before, but now AI has provided like a big old red easy button. And there's not a lot of friction between students and that button. Before, at least, the friction was finding another student to help you cheat, paying somebody to write a paper for you. There was some friction there, and now there's just none. So the real problem is that many of our assignments measured products instead of thinking, and we use those products to be a proxy for thinking. Now that AI produces those products easily, we have to do something else. And one of the really hard things about this is that students have also been trained in this system where a product was learning. So they know already that school rewards finished products. Their grades are based on finished products. They think that if they've completed the task, they've completed the learning. And they think also when they prompt AI, well, I prompted the AI and the answer went past my eyes on the screen, therefore I learned it, right? And of course, those are not true. But we have trained them to believe those things are true. And so now we're going to pay for that training. And we have to retrain our students as well as ourselves. We also know that learning requires a lot more than just having something go past you on the screen or into your ears. Learning requires a lot more than that. We know that interaction is one of the most important things for learning to stick. Struggling with some of the concepts yourself, repeating it over time, discussing it with a colleague, explaining it to somebody else, like teaching the concept. And one of the things that we don't pay a lot of attention to, but is also as important, is emoting. When you attach an emotion to learning, whether it's frustration or joy from figuring out something out, that actually sticks learning really well. And seeing a prompt spit you back the information you just asked for really doesn't do any of this. And so that's one of the big worries about using AI is that, if students aren't doing these things, what's the likelihood that anything sticks in their head, right? It's very low. So right now, we're all feeling this. We're kind of in this messy middle where before the work reflected the learning sometimes. In the future, we'll have redesigned learning and assessment, which will do a better job of it. And right now, we're in the middle where we can't detect things. Students are widely using AI. We're not giving them a ton of direction, and we don't quite know what to do about the redesign. So my goal in this presentation is to help you figure out some of what you need to be doing. And so I'm going to start with like a little story. I began to use AI with my students 2 years ago in my business classes, and I noticed right away that my middle schoolers, who I have for an elective, were also using AI. Nobody taught them. They just already knew. And it, I realized that some of their AI use is really just not even their fault. So, for example, I did this little naive experiment the fall of last school year where I decided I would require that the middle schoolers doing their research started with a website for their research. And again, this was very naive of me, and I didn't realize it until after we went through the exercise in class. And so, they all started with their topic. They all had unique topics, and they all started with their topic, and they did a Google search for their topic. So, of course, what shows up first in a Google search for a topic? It's not websites, is it? What shows up first? Tell me in the chat. What do you see first when you Google something now? Yeah, you see AI. Yeah, you see Gemini AI. And in fact, it takes up most of the screen. And so the first question they had was, well, where do we find websites? None of them had ever scrolled a Google page before, right? And they had kind of actually forgotten that Google Pages used to deliver websites. And so even just scrolling down below the AI was something that was not native to them anymore. And so we scrolled down below the AI and they found some websites. Of course, the next thing they found was that all of those websites were advertisements for things because they were researching real world things. And so every one of those real world things had companies who were advertising on Google. And so the next section was all ads for websites that were selling the products, not about the products, right? And so that was the next thing we had. And then, we actually had to hit the button that said go to the next page of Google. They were surprised to find that that existed. We went to the next page of Google. Then we found a lot of them then found the Wikipedia page for what they were learning about. And I actually thought to myself, oh, thank God we found a Wikipedia page, right? Which was ironic. And then they opened up the Wikipedia page. And we unfortunately were in the week that Wikipedia was taking donations. So the entire Wikipedia page was covered by an advertisement for donations. And the only way you could make it go away was to either donate or give them your email address so they could contact you later. And that's how we finally got to content on the internet. And that's the state of research right now for a lot of these kids. Oh, the ones who tried other websites, those were all blocked by the school. So, we were just, it was miserable. And I realized like one of the reasons they're using AI is because they can't find anything else to use, right? It's not like the internet is an easy place to navigate for them anymore. Between paywalls and blocked sites from the school, they just don't have access to a lot of great content. Um, so that was an eye opener for me to see that like students, it's the most natural thing for them to use. Everything in the world is pushing them towards this stuff. We may have to redesign entire courses now around this new reality, how we do research, how we do writing, how we do everything in the courses. In fact, that's what we were doing over this last week. So I'm going to give you an example of a course I redesigned to start with so you can see what that looks like. And so before AI, each unit of the course, I led learning on about 15 topics, and we did some topic-based activities, and we had a quiz that was open notes, and students made posters on a selected topic that they chose. A lot of the students would give like this would make a poster about the same topic. Like, five students would do potatoes and five students would do corn and, things like that when we were doing agricultural units. And as the posters went up, you started to realize that a lot of it was being done by AI now. Like a lot of the phrasing just came straight from AI. Some of the kids just cut out the print and just, stuck their taped things on a poster. It really wasn't demonstrating learning anymore. So after I did the whole redesign around AI, what I did was I cut down on what I taught to about 8 topics, 8 core topics. And then I took those other 7 topics and split them up into lots of student presentations instead. And I actually made a list of 40 possible topics that they could choose from, and stitching those smaller presentations together would get us back the 7 topics we skipped. Another way you can do it as a teacher is to say, like, well, I'm going to teach the same 15 topics, but I'm going to take out the details and leave that for presentation. Just teach the core of those 15 topics, right? And then the students give presentations on the little detailed things you might normally have covered. And so we still do topic-based activities, although I do restrict a lot of digital access. I don't, uh, in that their devices get put away at the beginning of class and they just don't get them back. So they do it out of their heads instead. I do have still quizzes, but I only allow open notes that are handwritten. And then now the students give several presentations during the course. And these are middle schoolers, by the way. So it's, a little bit of effort to get them there, but they do a fantastic job. And one of the real keys here is that every student gives a unique presentation. So there are no repeats, and I give them a list of potential topics. They can always propose a topic that's not on the list, but I want to make sure there's enough there in their topic, that there's enough actual useful information to the topic and the class, that they aren't picking something that kind of shoots them in the foot because it's a bad topic. And then we also do a whole bunch of simulations and labs in this class now. So that's kind of the general redesign. But since the big aspect of this course now is the presentations, that's the big grade. I want to talk about how I get successful learning experiences out of these presentations. And now I'll tell you that I'm giving you like the five major steps. There's a whole like hour and a half long version of all the little details that go into these presentations, but I'm going to start with just the biggies here to help you out. You can't just assign students, especially middle school students, a 3 to 4 minute presentation and expect good results without some scaffolding and structure to it. Also, they can build a presentation with AI, so you've got to navigate around that reality as well. So this is my goal. Give a 3 to 4 minute presentation without notes in front of the class, without reading, without notes, and answer audience questions at the end. And that is part of their grade, being able to field questions from the audience and successfully answer them. So the first thing is that I choose the topics. I give them a list of 40 topics they can choose from. There's a link here in the slide deck you can go to and to see like what those topics look like. But they basically get to choose a topic or propose one if they want. Of course, I use AI to help me generate that list of topics related to my core topics. So they're all interesting, and I go through and kind of curate which ones I'm going to keep. Every topic gets a list of questions the students should be able to answer. And of course, I generate these lists of questions with AI and then do just a little curating from unit to unit on how those get written. And so the students have to kind of focus their energy on answering things that help them connect the topic to the core, that make sure they've gone deep enough into the topic, that they're explaining the science, the engineering, things like that. I found if I didn't do this, they didn't do it. It didn't matter if it was on the rubric or not. They just didn't go deep enough. They didn't know what they didn't know, essentially. And so I ask enough questions that they're kind of forced to go in deeply into the topic. Um, the students then create a slide deck of 10 to, since they have 10 questions, it's usually like 12 plus slides. They have an intro slide and a question slide. So it's 10 for the questions and then two for that. A lot of them do it that way. But the specific rules they follow are here for a reason. First, I only let them put 5 words or less on a slide. And that's to keep them from reading their slides. They have to know their topic. They are not allowed to read from their slide because there's nothing on their slide to help them except for a very brief anchor. Like, what are you going to say on this slide? They can use unique images on each slide. They can use more than one as well, but they have to have at least one unique image per slide. And then, there's the rules you realize after you start doing something, right? So I added a couple more rules later. They can only have one diagram that includes words because I'll find images that have words on them, and then they'll start putting that in every slide to try to get more words. So I had to make a rule around that. And then I had, a couple of students who did their presentation entirely with memes or GIFs. So we had to make a rule that there was only one meme or GIF per presentation as well. So that's just kind of like the basics. And this means that the students quickly realize they have to know their topic because they're not going to be able to read their slides, right? And so everything about this exercise is about learning their topic deeply. And so from the time we start with the questions, which they have to summarize, they're of course going to use AI to do a lot of this research because we have no other choice. But they have to write things in their own words. They handwrite, and I do that specifically because If you get a two-paragraph answer from AI, none of these kids are going to write that two-paragraph answer into that space. They don't have the like stamina to do it, which means they have to summarize what they've read. And so that's their first step in learning, and I call that out. Making their slides is their second step in learning, thinking through what images they want to use, what words they want to use. And then the next thing we do is once their slides are created, we take a day of class and they practice. They do 3 rounds of practice with somebody else and get and give feedback each round. Because a lot of their uncomfortableness with presenting in front of a classroom is because they just do their presentations at the last minute and they don't know their topics and they've never practiced. And so a lot of this is just taking away their fear of giving presentations. They also will go through and generate questions they might be asked. Originally, I did this with Magic School, but now we just use Gemini for this or ChatGPT or whatever they're using because it's way easier than creating a room and going in. So they generate potential questions they might be asked and practice with those as well. And then finally, they give this 3 to 4 minute presentation without notes and answer audience questions as part of their grade. So that's part of the rubric is that they have to be able to answer some of those questions. And honestly, the presentations are delightful. If you give them enough scaffolding, they actually do a really good job. But you do have to give them that scaffolding. And a lot of it is that they haven't lived in a world where presentations were a norm assessment that they do, right? And so we can't assume they have these skills right now. I think there is a world like 3 to 4 years from now where kids coming out of, maybe like sixth or seventh grade, we can always assume they have the skills, but we can't assume that right now because they come from all different schools and things to us. I have some examples here you can click on in the slides, but I want to share one of the key insights I had about this assessment, which was that personally, if I want a motivation to learn something, I actually sign up to give a talk about it like 6 months from now. And that gives me the like motivation. It's like this element of public shaming if you don't do it well, right? That you're holding yourself to a higher standard when you present it to a group. And so the key insight I had was there has to be accountability to the learning somewhere. It can't just be that you turn in a paper. There has to be more than that. And so I started to frame this as like accountability gates or learning gates. What we have to do now is not measure the work product. We have to measure the learning and make it accountable along the way. And then the work product is only a portion of the grade of the whole thing, right? A lot more of the percentage gets assigned to the steps along the way. And so the first thing we have to do is change assessments, right? We can't continue in this world without, changing some of the assessments. Um, so the ways we change assessment, I think right now. So first, presentations. They're a great way to force the learning to happen, especially if you don't let them read from the slides, right? And so you've got to have a very specific type of presentation, but you can do it for all sorts of different subjects. I think in math, you could give the students 10 problems, and when they come to class, they're going to have to present one you choose. So they have to prepare all of them to be ready. For English, you can have them talk about the design, like how the revisions they made. You can have them take a character for something they've read and put them in a new situation. For history, you can teach a core and have the students do the events surrounding the core or the different facets of society, culture, business, technology, inventions, things like that. For science, you can have them do updates to technology, applications related to things that they're learning. All sorts of those would make great presentations. And the tip here is just to ask AI for help with this one, so that you want every presentation the kids do to be unique and interesting to watch. If you don't do that, then it will get boring really fast for the kids. But if they're all different, it turns out that they're kind of interested, both because they are curious about the topic, and because there's something about the spectacle of watching their colleagues present that keeps them interested. The second thing I think that's really great that we can do now is scenarios. It's never been easier to write like a case study or scenario. And so you can write you can have AI write for you, like, here's an experiment similar to the one we did, but for this group it went wrong. Like, analyze that. Or, in English, here's this character from the book, and I've put them in a new situation. Read the new situation they're in, and then use what you know about this character to guess how they'll react, right? Like that would be a great way to validate that they've actually done the reading, they understand the characters, things they can provide evidence, things like that. Business case studies are great, engineering problems. A case study is essentially just a story, like a real world story about something. And these used to take days for people to create. And now you can go back and forth with AI to create one and use that as a jumping off point for, do you know the topic well enough to react to something? Again, here I would use AI to do this. I would ask for way more scenarios than you need. If you need one scenario, ask for three. So you can kind of like pick the best of and then revise it a couple times. If you want, sometimes I use like scenarios that are just as simple as one or two sentences, and where we're matching to vocabulary words, things like that. If I do that and I need 10, I'll ask for 20. So I can throw out the bad ones. So ask for way more than you need. Another way we can handle the assessment problem right now is in class follow-up. So when students submit work to you, so like if you do need them to write a paper or something like that, on the day they submit it to you, you should have them in class answer some questions about what they just submitted. So, why did you choose this method, this article, this character? What was the hardest part of the research or writing you just did? Tell me a little bit about your thesis statement and how you defended it. Why did you choose this price point for a business plan? Things like that. So you can pick one question that all the students should be able to answer no matter what they turned in. And then they have to in class write about it, right? So they have to like defend their own work as they turn it in. Now, this isn't to catch them cheating. This is a really important distinction. You should tell them you're going to do this up front. And the reason is that all they need is some friction between them and the easy button to keep them from doing it. And so if you tell them up front that there's going to be friction here, that they have to know their topic well enough to answer a couple questions in class on the day they submit, they're more likely to do it themselves because you have just created accountability in the assignment. And they have to be able to know, even if they got help with AI, they have to be able to defend their thinking, right? And why they chose the direction they did. The goal isn't for us to catch them, it's to stop the over-reliance, right? And so this is what I call an accountability gate, right? Like the questions you would ask after class. Another way you can do this is with student-led questioning. So perhaps when the students are presenting, each student would write a couple questions as they, hear that presentation, and then you pick students randomly to ask questions. And so you can model this for them first with the presentation, show them what a good question is and what isn't, and then the students asking questions get some kind of grade, the students answering the questions get some kind of grade. But this also again forces them to defend the work they've done, right? Again, tell them up front, same goal as last time. It's not to catch them, it's to provide friction to stop them from outsourcing their thinking, right? Another type of project you can do is a throughput project, which is like finding some kind of project that would go for the entire semester or a really long portion of the semester, where every time you teach a new course concept, they kind of like adds something to the project. And so they keep adding knowledge to the project and presenting what they've learned as the course progresses. One of the new solutions we came up next week for these larger projects is to use something. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Wheel of Names. I think it's like thewheelofnames.com. You can put your students on it and then randomly select students. And for some reason, they think it's kind of like a game that they're playing because I don't know, it's very visible how the names are being selected, right? What you could do at the beginning of classes is always choose 5 students from the Wheel of Names. And whoever you choose has to stand up for 30 seconds or 1 minute and give an update about their project, right? And so again, there's this kind of like built-in accountability that on any given day you could be called on to give an update. So you should always be ready with like what you've done lately. And I've seen some really clever examples of projects. There's kind of like the standard ones, like a business plan is an easy one to do this with. But it could be something as simple as like a state a state or a national park that they carry through the entire semester, where they're learning the governance of the state, or they're learning the economics of the national park, or the ecology of the national park, something like that. But you can pick some projects, and again, AI could probably be very helpful for choosing some where you continue to come back to it over and over and over throughout the semester, and the students should be updating it always and could always be called on, right? These new types of projects and assignments, we're essentially just building in learning gates where you observe the learning happening instead of just grading a final project, right? You should make the grading as easy as possible. It could be as simple as like a yes, you did it, or no, you didn't. It could be more deep in a couple places, and then it's light at the end. So when you think about the grading, don't expect you're going to grade the final project with all the fidelity you would have graded it before. You're going to take the grading of that project and break it into smaller grades throughout the whole project instead, and scaffold those pieces. One of the big aha moments we had in last week's workshop was actually that the what we realized is that the students jump right to the final thing. Like if you tell them to build a presentation, they jump right into a slide deck and try to build it. If you tell them to write a paper, they jump right into the paper and start trying to write. Somehow they've lost the skills, or we haven't taught them the skills to organize their thoughts, to do more research than they need to do for a presentation or a paper. And so we realized that however it happened, there does need to be more scaffolding to these things. And the good news is that that scaffolding also creates gates where we can observe learning. And that's really important because we can't just look at a final project and say, yes, they've learned, right? We need to observe it sooner. In fact, our English faculty actually decided that they were going to require a presentation before the students started writing their final paper because they think that the synthesis that goes into doing the presentation is the exact type of synthesis and organization of information that's necessary to sit down and write a paper. And that somehow that's gotten lost, that when they log into a computer and look at a blank screen, they're not organizing information. So they're going to have them do it on sticky notes and index cards and things like that, get ready to do a presentation, and then write and see if that goes better. So whatever those learning gates are, build them into your the products that you have that are starting to fail now, and grade all of those little pieces. Look for the learning in those little pieces. Now, before we so AI didn't actually break teaching; it broke assessment. Okay, but the problem with that is you can't just change the assessment without changing what happens in class. In order to see the evidence of learning that you can no longer easily assess, you have to also change what you do in a classroom. So while it didn't necessarily break that, we actually have to do that better now. And so we're going to talk next about how to change the learning. And I do want to take a short break here and tell you a little bit about Socrait. We're going to have a little commercial break for maybe 3 minutes. And then we'll go back to the topic. I hope you'll let us share a little bit about what we do, and then we'll go right back into this. So for those of you in the chat, I just want to see if this has been helpful for you so far. If you've had an aha moment, something that's really stood out to you, if you could share that. And I'm gonna jump over to showing you just a little bit about what Socrait is. I'm gonna set a timer so I don't take too long here. And take our little commercial break, and then we'll come back. Um, so let me escape from this presentation and jump over to tell you just a little bit about Socrait. So Socrait is a voice-powered classroom assistant designed to help teachers. Kristen and I both work at Socrait, and what we wanted to do was help teachers with like the day-to-day struggles of being in the classroom. And so there's like, the reality is that one teacher either has 150 students with like wildly different needs generating data all day, or if you're an elementary teacher, you have fewer students, but they still are all wildly different and they still generate data like throughout the day. And you've got to try to remember all that data as you teach them, and it's just too much. It's too much data. And so, on top of that, you have all this end of day stress with other people who want to know the data that you encounter during the day. And it's just too much. Like, by the end of the day, we're all just like, I can't do this. I don't even remember the data. I'm done. It's too much. And so, what we built is an app that helps you remember your data throughout the day. Just a lightweight phone app where you teach the way you normally teach and talk, and we convert that to data for you. So in class, you just press start and stop and teach the way you normally do. After class, you log in and look at a dashboard. And that dashboard will give you back all sorts of data about your day, gives you back behavior data, warnings and praises of students, and it also is logging like the phrases that were used so that we can help you with writing behavioral follow-ups. We have attendance signals there, class summary of like assignments you changed, what you taught, etc. All of the to-dos you generate throughout the day. You can generate parent emails. We have some newer features now, like being able to generate messages over time. I'm going to skip through some of these, but like here's an example of a behavioral message that's just generated for you based on the things you said in class that day. And now we can do it over time as well. So if you want a behavioral message that's just a summary over a month worth of data or something like that, we can do that too. We give you back great behavior insights about students who've done really well and messages about those folks. Classroom moments, the best moments of your day back at the end of the day. And then, like I said, behavior over time, where you can see trends for students, trends you would never remember yourself because you can't possibly remember this much data about this many students. So if you're looking for summaries for an IEP or tier one MTSS data, things like that, we've got your back. It's all there. Um, so that brings me to about 3 minutes, which is all I wanted to share. Um, but and I'll jump back to the presentation now. Kristen will put a link in the chat if you're interested. We're going to send teachers a little back to school kit with a pouch to use for your phone, instructions on how to get started. And so if anybody would like the back to school kit, we'll send it to you about a week before you get your students so that it's fresh in your mind and you're like feeling back to being ready to go. Um, Anyways, I'm going to go back to our presentation here and our normally scheduled activity, as one would say. And let's talk about how we would change the learning as well. Um, okay, so all right, so changing the learning. This is the interesting part. You can't change the assessments without changing the learning. And one of the things that students kind of think right now, especially because they're relying on AI so heavily, is that if they read it, watch it, hear it once, they've understood it forever. And of course, that is definitely not the case. If learning worked this way, then we would just hand students a stack of books and say good luck, and that would be the end of it. And we all know it doesn't work that way. Two books I'm going to recommend to you, and again, this is in the slide deck, so you can get it from that, are Make It Stick, which is about durable learning practices, and this book called Cognitive Development and Learning in Instructional Contexts, which is fantastic. It's like neuroscience, but specifically the neuroscience around learning. And it's really easy to read, and I found it to be like it's an epiphany every time I reread the book. It's really good. So the long and the short of these things is that learning sticks, knowledge sticks when students are doing things like retrieving, explaining, testing ideas, connecting concepts, discussing, struggling, emoting. That's kind of required for learning to stick for anything long term. Um, Devices have not probably not been our friend on this because learning inside of a program on a device can really cause learning boredom. When every passage you read looks exactly the same, it's on the same device, it has the same background, it has the same callouts. It's a little bit like learning inside of a prison cell. Every helpful tip happens right when you need it. You never actually struggle. In fact, if you've watched students use some of these programs, they'll actually activate a wrong answer so they can get to the video that tells them how to do it faster. There's not a lot of struggle happening there. And that means that there's not a lot of spark happening there either when they have excitement around learning. The other problem we have with devices is that they cause a lot of distraction. As soon as students open a device, there's 10 tabs there where they want to go before they start your activity. And if any device is even nearby, research shows that you've lost the attention of students as they think about the next time they're going to use their precious, right? And so these two things, the devices are creating a lot of distraction from learning. In fact, unless we are specifically doing a device-based activity, I have students put their devices away before they sit down. We get them when we do device activities, but if they're out of sight, they're out of mind, and I own their attention more than the device does. Really, I want them to own their attention with each other as they work, but just a call out here to the real role of these things. So one of the things I love to use in class is erasable boards. I always put whiteboards up around my whole classroom. Students work in pairs or groups of three, and the discussion they have, the interactions they have around what they're learning is just as important to learning as anything else, as well as the commitment to an answer, which they seem to be more willing to make in erasable spaces. The reason it works is because the work is temporary. They're standing or moving more. It's easy to erase mistakes. They discuss what they're doing because they have to make an answer to the group. And I just wanted to say that if you don't have boards around your room, that's totally fine. Lap boards work great for this type of thing. In fact, even though I have boards around the room, I will sometimes use lap boards for some activities. It's a good way to produce results. Um, there are some very nice rapid board challenges you can do on the fly. Like you can do brain dumps, like tell me everything you remember about, and then pick some topic from last week and have them dump everything they can remember. And then you always time box it, and then you can reward stars out loud for good stuff you see, right? So you can have them like put a star by, if you've said this, put a star by it. If you said this, put a star by it, and then they can count to see how many stars they have when they're done. You could do things on the whiteboard like summarize this paragraph in, one sentence. You could have them do things like, here's a sentence, write me 5 variations of this sentence that are written in different ways. You can have them solve a problem, all sorts of things you can do. But they're really great for observing the learning in person. This book is worth reading, even if you don't teach math, because it goes through a lot of the research why some of these things work. It's called Building Thinking Classrooms in Mathematics, especially good if you're a math teacher, but I've found that people from other subjects find it valuable too. I've also shared a link to my favorite whiteboard company for lap boards. I've had a set of these for over a decade, and they still work. They still erase, they still work. They're great. And so if you're going to invest, I would invest in a high quality set so that you never have to invest again. Physical work promotes interaction and critical thinking. So I'll give you some other ideas for physical work the kids can do besides being at a whiteboard. The first one of those are various types of card sorts. Categorization makes a great card sort, sorting types of entrepreneurs and little one-sentence descriptions of them, natural selection types, cell structures, sentence types, quotes from characters, and the characters they match up to. This is essentially just an activity that looks something like this. You have categories and you have scenarios, or you have, categories and sentences, or categories and vocabulary words, or something like that. You literally cut out a set of cards. I'll show you in a bit how you organize all this, but students interacting over a deck of cards that they're sorting means they're talking to each other, they're sorting information, they're thinking about what they know, how to apply it. It works really great. You could also do this with true and false sorting variations. You can do true and false, you can do correct or incorrect, correct or needs work, misconceptions and correct concepts. This really happened in history, this didn't happen in history, things like that. Oh, by the way, I'll go back to this for a second. One thing that's great to do here is to have a none of these category. And so that automatically makes it a harder task is to have, like, if they know matching is fairly easy. When suddenly there's a none of these category, it gets a lot harder. Here's an example of a true false activity where they're just taking facts about what we just learned and seeing if they can categorize them into trues and falses. Puzzle discoveries are really great. These are not like things you can do in every topic, right? But if you ever find you're teaching something that has patterns to it, like chemistry nomenclature, or in math, like expressions with factored expressions, or code and results in a computer science class, or sentences and the types of sentences, something like that. You can give them a set of correct things and let them find the patterns themselves. And after they find the patterns, they can make hypotheses about what the patterns are. And after that, you teach them the rules. And that's a really great way to learn because our brains are naturally gravitating towards like sorting out patterns. Another thing you can do is a gallery walk where students move through stations. They might analyze short scenarios, uh, or they might actually do brain dumps on a gallery walk. And so you can put up topics around the room, especially for a review at the end of a unit. You can put up topics and they walk around the room and add everything they can remember to the topics and walk around a couple times so they can see what other people wrote if that spurs them to remember new things. They can write down things they don't know, like questions they still have, things like that. That can be a really great activity as well. If you're going to do stuff like this that involves paper, this old-fashioned, notion, I use cardstock for most of these things. There is actually a post here about like the exact stuff I use to organize this, but basically it's half-size manila envelopes, plastic bins to hold them, and then jewelry bags to hold the cards or binder clips. And all you have to do is make the activity once, and then you could use it year after year after year, but it's important to get some kind of organization up front, or you will find yourself drowning in these things very quickly. So you'll start with a box per course, and then eventually you'll graduate into a box per unit, and they'll stack up somewhere in your closet. But the students really like them, and it's a nice way to be able to observe the learning right there in class, right? The last thing I want to talk about here is the importance of exploration and struggle in learning. We don't emphasize this enough, especially in our kind of testing heavy culture. And I think this is one of the places we've gone wrong, and thus one of the reasons why we're having so much trouble around these writing activities and project activities and things like that. Um, this book is worth a read. It's called A Theory of Fun for Game Design by Raf Koster. I think it's one of the best books about education I've ever read, and it's ironically not about education, but it really is. I always tell people if they get the book to take a Sharpie and cross out for game design and write for educators instead, and it'll work just as well. And the main thing he talks about in here is this idea that games are designed in a very specific way so that players can try things, explore the spaces, and test the possibilities. And if you want transferable learning, like if you want their math to be able to transfer to science or business or economics or financial literacy, or to get their writing to transfer to any of the other subjects, to get transferable learning, you have to create exploration spaces. Students have to be able to try things, test ideas, explore the spaces, and learn the consequences the same way that happens in video games. And let me show you what I mean by that. There are two ways we can ask a lot of our questions. So like if we look at the first and second question on all these slides, you'll start to see the difference. The first question here would involve a very strict answer. There's like two ways to do the problem, but everybody's going to gravitate to one or the other. It's a very straightforward question. The second one on this page, there's a lot of things that they can explore in their head as they do this. It's actually one of the things they will find is the answer to this top question, because that's how you would find the zeros. But as they answer this second question, they're going to tell us about what type of function is it? What's the domain and range of the function? What are the zeros? Does it open up or down? What's the vertex? Like where does it increase? Where does it decrease? There's a lot more they're exploring in their head with this second question. Here's another example from a science class. I could ask a student, what is gravity? Or I could ask them to write down at least 5 engineering examples where gravity plays a role, right? And as they think through engineering examples, they're going to think a lot more deeply about the role of gravity and things. And also, what we might get there is examples that are outside of the norm. There might be some incorrect examples in there. And then we get to talk about those examples, right? We get to find where the mistakes are. I wouldn't find the mistakes on this first question, but I would find the mistakes on the second question. Here's another example for a history class. You could ask a student, when was Watergate or what was Watergate? But that's a kind of boring question. If you ask instead, tell me everything you know about Watergate and maybe also everything you don't know about Watergate, you're getting, again, an exploration of the space in their head instead of just one specific fact. Um, Again, for computer science, you could ask students, what is a case statement? Or you could ask for 5 useful ways to use a case statement. Like, when would you use it instead of something else? And so these all create the space in the head where you're exploring a whole realm of possibilities in your head and like pushing on those things and writing down some things. You might be wrong on a couple of them, but at least we're now surfacing those things. And so a much better option. So we need to kind of create learning mazes where students think outside the standard path to get an answer. They're allowed to make mistakes. They struggle to surface more knowledge than, just the standard question. They see there's more than one way to answer a question, where they connect ideas they're learning to other concepts they have in their head. We need to do more of this in our courses because, again, then we're observing learning right there in front of us, not just an answer to a question, but learning as a more general space that they're in. Um, so I want to kind of wrap up here, and I think where we're at is that AI changes what schools have to measure, in a good way, actually. It's just going to take us some time to get to where we all feel like we can do it well. The old model was that we assessed finished work, and the new model is that we have to assess the thinking, the learning that goes into the work. We have to be able to assess the explanation, the reasoning, the discussion, the problem solving. We're assessing along the way to the product now instead of the product itself as the end all be all to the learning. And one of the things we have to do is explain the how and why in learning over and over to the students. We can't assume they understand why we're doing things. So, for example, when I teach students, when we start working on the presentations, and I teach them that they need to summarize what they've researched and write it down, not write it down word for word, but summarize it. I teach them that that first step of summarizing in your head is the first step towards cementing what you're going to remember. The act of chunking the things you read into the things you're writing down is actually a really important step. And we're going to have to make those things visible to them. We're going to have to teach it over and over and over and never assume they already know it to the point where as soon as you start explaining, they just yell it back to you. When we get to that point, we're going to start seeing better results with students. I think we just haven't illuminated the learning before. We've paid attention to the final products. We need to move the development of the mind to the center of every activity we do in class and every assessment we do, and figure out where is it important that we see the development of the mind happening. So I'm going to put this back up so you know how to reach me, and I'm going to stop there. We have a few minutes for questions in the chat, and then there's a follow-up workshop to this. If you didn't sign up for it, you're welcome to come to that as well, where we're going to take things that you're struggling with and see if we can unpack how to make a better version of them for this new world. So you're welcome to come to that second workshop, which is right after this one, if you'd like to. I think Kristen's probably putting the link to that one in the chat if you didn't sign up for that and would like to come. Um, but hopefully this has been helpful to you. This is, again, the 1 hour version of a week-long workshop. So it's a little fast and a little light on the details, but hopefully enough to get you started. I'm going to look at the chat.